today happens to be the third death anniversary of Gauri Lankesh. Paniraj sir specifically asked us as a group to remember her on this day. As you all know, on September 5th, 2017, Gauri Lankesh was assassinated. She was a journalist and an activist. And it's in a series of such assassinations that included Dabolkar, Govind Pansare, Kalburgi. Gauri was also assassinated during 2017 on September 5th. And the connection with cinema, Anand Patwardhan has made a film in 2018 called Vivek or Reason. So you may want to catch up on the film in YouTube. So I now request Paniraj sir to just remember Gauri Lankesh in a couple of words.
Yeah, the the point to bring this memoriam of Gauri here is, of course, today all over the world she is celebrated. I mean, she has been remembered, and activists are being uh, celebrating her for her martyrdom. But I want to bring certain personal issues which is very relevant to this group. In a sense that Gauri is a public figure now after her death, but she is a very personal, liberating woman, which is very necessary for this group, because I find so many young and liberating women in this group, and she was so fascinated with her liberation that if you can define what is liberalism, we could have defined with Gauri. And in her life, she did her journalism independently of her family. Understand that she did her journalism independent of family. She traveled all over India. She traveled all over the world. And finally, when it came back to taking the responsibility of her father, iconic Lankesh, she took it on herself to run that iconic tabloid. For 17 years, I have been associated with her in the editorial team and as a personal friend, and she taking me as a brother. Closely looking at her life, it's a liberating life that we should remember. We have been celebrating her for her public appearances, public intellectualism, and we have been celebrating her for her publicness, if I can call so. But there is something personal to her, a kind of liberal instinct in her to do what she wish and what she thinks is right. And she didn't care to, she didn't care to expect any support for her cause if she believes that it is to be done. Many a times she used to say, uh, I want to do this. We should say, but she said, if you care to be with me, you do it. Otherwise, get away. I will do it. I mean, that's a kind of a liberative attitude she had that is not being remembered. That is the pain what is pricking me. That's why I wanted this group to listen to her liberative attitude and personal commitment to things which are happening around, which public may not respond, because there are many eccentric things she didn't agree with, which public, even including left, may agree with, but she didn't agree and she want to force it, saying that this is not okay. The kind of attitude of personal liberty is so much important to India and women in India today. And we have lost such a powerful personality who could have been with us, because she would have carried all of your women here to the extent she could have. That's all I'll say. I want to remember her for personal liberty attitude which could guide a lot of liberating women here to carry their way with commitment, with convict. Even if somebody can't come to help, she said, I will go alone. So going alone and facing the things, consequences herself is the one thing which we miss, and if we miss Gauri, we cannot replace her. So that is the thing which I want to say to you today in her memoriam. Salute to her, libertarian, liberal, say, attitude of freedom, which could and which should liberate women of India. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for those words, and particularly coming from someone who has interacted so closely with her and knowing her personally. For us, she was a public figure, stood for certain ideals and ideologies. You have brought alive to us another side, and also connected, her to this group, a very nice way. Thank you very much, Paniraj sir. Good evening to all who have joined today for this discussion of Patterson, the film Patterson. It was suggested to us by Grishma. Grishma Prakash is a PhD scholar in India and World Literature Department in the English and Foreign Languages University. She works on visual culture and photography. She did her master's in University of Hyderabad. Before that, she did her undergraduation in EFL University, and she's come back here for her PhD. Thanks, Grishma, for suggesting such a charming film. And we really look forward to the discussion. Okay. Yeah, Grishma, over to you now. We are discussing the film Patterson, and Grishma will now take up the discussion.
Hi, hello everyone. Good evening to all. Suddenly I was taken aback discussing Patterson in such a situation. I mean, so let me begin with a tribute to Gauri Lankesh and all the other intellectuals who lost their life to this fascist government. And strangely, Patterson is not. I probably we should have discussed something else. And so when Nikhila ma'am actually suggested that I introduced the film, I was quite at the peak of my panic. And then it's also because I think for me personally, there's something very beautiful that I took of the film, and so this is actually an attempt to share some of that beauty, and in the process also introduce the phenomenal filmmaker Jim Jarmusch. So on that note, I would like to take off, and I have actually sectioned my presentation into three. This is for my own understanding. So and I have a few hints and pointers with which I read the film. So the first section is called Mapping Patterson, the Man and the City. So in 1943, William Carlos Williams actually wrote a book. He started writing an epic poem on the city of Patterson, which is very unlike of William Carlos Williams, because he is known for his short poems and visual poetry and images poetry, etc. And when we talk of William Carlos Williams, yet this was one of his major works in his lifetime, because he took around 20 years and he died writing the 6th volume of the book. So this is from a letter from William Carlos Williams to Robert McAlmon, which was written in 8th August 1943 about his book Patterson, and I quote, Patterson, an account, a psychological social panorama of a city, treated as if it were a man, the man Patterson. So, so in some sense, I think Jim Jarmusch is also, inspired by the New York School of Poetry in general. He is also drawing a lot of parallels from the book, William Carlos Williams's book Patterson. And in some sense, essentially both of them wanted to, represent a very typical American city, so uh, I mean, there are references to idols, American idols who belong to Patterson, who has been there or who's been either born there or visited there, and people like that, not from the mainstream really, but important people in some sense. So he's also trying to map the city and the history of the place, languages involved, uh, different kind of cultures that come in, into the geography, right? So, so I propose there are some parallels that you can draw from the book to the film. Um, Incidentally, William Carlos Williams's book is also in section 6 parts, and the film is about 6 days, 7 days, but then seventh day is not really shown, right? So it's also a snippet from, uh, Patterson's life, right? And the main landmarks of the book. So the first book is about the Great Passaic Falls, which is a waterfall, which Patterson visits when he eats the lunch and takes a stroll and all that, right? So that is the first part. Second part is about a park, which is again there in the film. Third is about the library. Fourth about the river Patterson, and fifth about how the river flows into the sea. So in some sense, you can make parallels between the book, the city, and also the man Patterson, right? um, uh, an American architect called Kevin Lynch. He came up with two ideas to define a space in a 1960 book called The Image of a City. Right? So he talks about imageability in a city, and he says there are two things that you can like a map. For instance, so first one is called a node. The second is called a landscape. A node is a place where you can enter and exit, right? And it involves some kind of movement also, right? Whereas, as all of us know, landscape is external to the person itself. It can be a building, it can be any other monument, a river, etc., etc. But then it is external, right? So if you define, in order to define a place, you can use both node and mm, landmark. In the similar way, sometimes I feel Patterson has drawn landscapes from landmarks from the book, and he's sort of mixing all of this in the film. For instance, Patterson, the character, belongs to the node, the city, and he is inside the city. He's entering the city. He's living in the city, right? Then there is his home. So he wakes up every morning, has breakfast, and then he walks to his work. And then there's the bus, which can be another node, because it can be called a cultural node also, because a lot of people enter and exit, right? And then he goes back to his home. He's going into his library, right? Which is also the basement, right? And then at night he dog walks to the bar, right? And it's very fixed. You can actually map Patterson in some sense, uh, right? That is one interesting element that I found in the film. So I think he incidentally draws a lot of. I mean, what was his intention behind the film is quite unknown, and I don't think we should worry about that. But then uh, there are very interesting elements that you can draw between the book and the film, right? And Patterson sort of drifts between these notes and landscape. There is a flow, like the poetry, like how poetry flows within Patterson. There is also a drift, right, which is only obstructed when his book gets burned, toned down. So, and similar to that, in book 3 of Patterson, William Carlos Williams's, he talks of a fire that took um, away the city of Patterson in 1902. So what happens is their only library gets burned in the fire, right? So, and then he writes about it. These are very beautiful lines, so I'll read it out. This is from the book, right? So he says, calling the fire good, so be it. The beauty of fire blasted sand, that was glass, that was bottle, unbottled, unabashed, so be it. Right? So uh, Carlos Williams was, he was devastated on hearing the news of the fire. Then he says, it's good. So in some sense, uh, our main character, played by Adam Driver, as you all know, he is losing his only identity, right? The book of poetry was his, probably the only identity, I would say. I mean, otherwise, he's a very, very non-distinct character, right? But then he also finds a way to, although his flow is obstructed, like how the city of Patterson has rejuvenated itself into life back, Patterson also finds his flow back, you know. So these are some parallels that I found very interesting in the film. And second is about the idea of a harlequin and a hero. Um, Jim Jarmusch is famously known as an independent American filmmaker in the world cinema also, as in he is known for subverting Hollywood themes into and making very interesting movies out of it. There's a 2013 film called Only Lovers Left Alive, in which he deals with two vampires. It's a love story, and it's quite opposite to all the vampire narratives that we've seen. Vampires is also is very original to America and the culture, right? So in that way, so when it was very interesting to he when I noticed that she's buying a Harlequin guitar, and why is the guitar called a Harlequin in American pop culture? Harlequin is a stock character. She is the companion of Joker in the Batman series. So Harlequin originally was a 16th century character, comical character, which was adopted by the DC Comics, and there is a whole lot of pop cultural narratives that runs around Harlequin. There's the Suicide Squad, the film that was recently out. There are different ways in which Harlequin is dealt. One thing very interesting about Harlequin is her costume, right? So the costume originally is always in two colors, black and red, right? And obviously she is a little eccentric, because she is the opposite character of Joker, and also anti-hero in some sense, right? But then and these are elements. See, if you look at Laura, who is probably the most exciting character of the film, she's almost like the soul of the film, like the muse, right? Always radiant and super energetic and creative, and that kind of a character she is. She also comes with a little probably not madness, but then that kind of excitement towards things, and she plays around with the colors too. In this case, it's just black and white, right? And then she plays around with black and white throughout. I mean, if you look at her interior designing and painting and the dresses that she designs, it's strangely in black and white, right, throughout. So there are strange parallels that you can draw between Harlequin and Laura also, because both of them are very very essentially carnivalesque in their nature. Bringing in some sort of unreality to the real, boring, ordinary life. So in that sense, our Patterson will immediately be the Joker. Like the Joker, he is also a working class hero, right? Hero and hero. In our case, it's a hero. So it's very interesting why Jim Jarmusch wanted a hero like Patterson. I mean, there is nothing heroic about Patterson, right? Evidently, right? If you compare him with any other American, because America is very famous for the superhero films. There's Batman, there's Superman, there's all kinds of people. There's Star Wars series, right? Adam Driver himself has acted in a Star Wars film in Last Jedi, I think. So he's an antidote to all this drama and excitement and unnecessary action, right? But then he is a hero in the sense he's a hero of not really the composition, but in some sense the action, because uh, there are shots where he reacts on the time, you know. So how does, what is heroism in a day-to-day life, or in the ordinary life? How do we see anything as heroic? So so in that sense um, he's also presenting to us very not these ultra masculine, as opposed to all these ultra masculine the people who come and save the world, you know. So one joke that was going around soon after the COVID lockdown is you know, regarding how America deals, how the US you know, deals with crisis in the films, as opposed to how US deals with crisis in reality. You know, in all their films, they are super good. Contagion, be it Contagion or any, there are people who will come and save the entire world, and that's not what heroism is about at all. So in some sense, I think Jarmusch wanted to sort of create a subversive hero, and he has successfully done that through the very quiet, ordinary, poetic, imaginative Patterson. Right? And that brings me to the last and final part of the discussion. This is my favorite takeaway from the film. I love this film particularly because of this. It's a theory of everyday life. You know, finding poetics in the most mundane of things. Right? Every day, as such, is a huge theoretical work, and if you look at the everyday reader, there are almost around 25 people who has written particularly on this, starting with Martin Heidegger, etc., etc. There's Ben Highmore, right? So Michel de Certeau is another theorist. So he comes up with two interesting terms. One is called a strategy, and the other is called a tactic. So he says strategy is these repressive forms on all of us on a day-to-day basis. You know, when you there are repressive structures on us, right? Placed by be it our work, the workplace, the society, the media, right? Almost like the repressive state apparatus and the ideological state apparatus, but not really the same, I think. And he says on a day-to-day basis, individuals perform in certain ways. Like for instance, they engage in very normal acts of doing in a routine. Like for instance, walking, like our Patterson does, or writing poetry, or cooking and painting, learning guitar, etc., etc., like Laura does. And how these are the tactics that with which we sort of brush away uh, 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 brush away, or in some sense resist to this oppression, you know. So these are, he calls these as creative resistances, right, from the whole neoliberal capitalist run, right. So he explains this with an example. So he says, see, suppose if I'm walking from point A to point B, um, it is more likely that all these apparatus, including our surveillance, the state and the Google Maps that we have today, see, they will know where we are going, right? Even if there are n number of ways to reach point B from point A, there is a distinct pattern, right? But then on an individual level, there are moments with which we can escape these patterns. For instance, if I'm going into a shop, or say a friend's place in between, then I am breaking that flow, right, of surveillance, right? And which is not really possible now because all of us have mobile phones and all of that. But for Patterson, he doesn't have a phone. He says it's a leash, right? So he essentially is someone who's mastered in the tactics of living everyday life, which essentially is, finding beauty in the smallest of things around, finding poetry in the smallest of things. Um, again, I know it's a very privileged position, to say that, it's very privileged. It's a very privileged position to not be taken away by the chaos. But then there are, probably some things that we can do, personally, change certain things to look at, everything around us with little more subtlety and, almost see, not, if not so deeply and beautifully as Patterson, but paying attention to whatever you are, and to really, being there at the moment might help in some way to, escape all of this. And if, in some sense, both Laura and Patterson, um, are, they do exist as two different bubbles. So even from a distance, even when their relationship looks, okay, sorry. Even when the relationship looks, very, very magical from the outside, it is not. I mean, I think they fall in the same, almost in the same structure as any other relationship falls. They have money issues, right? All the working class issues they do have, right? And there's a friction between the dog and Patterson. Then, there is jealous, if not jealousy, then she's Laura's asking a girl, who do you, I mean, she's her expressions change. So these are all very normal, ordinary things. So they are not extraordinarily human beings. It's not a magical love story at all. So what makes them distinctly them and contented, I think, in some sense, is because they have their own bubbles, their own places where they can stay where they are, and it's a very inclusive space. They come together, these bubbles do intersect at some point, and they share things in that intersection, right? So the idea that a perfect relationship is not really a static, position, but coming together and drifting apart and things like that. And these were very, very, I mean, I still carry some part of the film within me, in the beauty of the whole of the portrayal, right? The poetry in the film. And also in saying that, if sometimes probably, a step outside of all of this could be a step ahead of this, right? Right. Well, that is my opinions, that is my observations on the film. Yeah, I would to open the floor for discussion. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Grishma. That was really very nice. The three-part structure that you had, I think, filled us in on many details that at least I was not aware of. And it's almost like you have an incipient paper, paper in some incipient fashion already ready with you. So really good work and nice, yeah. So you've really brought together, especially also your idea of the everyday and attempting to theorize a little bit from the film as well. So thanks a lot for this really good overview. Well done as a researcher. Yeah. So, would
I
anyone?
don't know any other way to do this. That's the problem.
Sorry?
No, I don't know any other way to look at this. That is the only problem.
Yeah. No, and that is perfect. I mean, that's absolutely perfect. Yeah. The discussion is now open. Would anyone want to start? Would anyone want to come in to begin with, respond to what Grishma has been saying, or respond to the film? Yeah, please let me know if anyone. Yeah.
Yeah. I can add only, Grishma, I first apologize Kavya and Bhagya for not being there for their presentation, because I mean, Grishma presented it so well, but I want to add something to what Grishma had said, that it was in 2016, isn't it, Grishma? This is 2016.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I competed for Comedy Award in 2016.
Right.
I mean, biggest award what film can look into in 2016. and it competed with many competent films in that year. I mean, surprisingly, there were very fabulous films. And that year, I. Daniel Blake won the award, right? And there was Brilliant Evandosa's Marosa. There was Infante Terrible. Who is that from Canada? Who is that? I mean, there were plenty of films which were intimate and socially explosive. And this is the only film where Jarmusch came near to Palme d'Or. I mean, like, I wish that it would have come a year later where you would have won a Palme d'Or. I mean, it's worth it. And last part, what you said is very interesting. That's everydayness. I mean, poetics in everydayness is the one thing which he wants to bring in. I mean, I suppose with all the things what you said is poetics in everyday things is the one which challenges whatever you said about capitalism, neo-capitalism, or Hollywood style of it. Say a poetics in everydayness. Because if you look at his filmography, which is idiosyncratic, okay, goes up, comes down, goes up, comes down, and he finally in 2019 he ends with a zombie film, okay. And that is very interesting. That Patterson is the one film which came near to Palme d'Or. Unfortunately, it competed with a lot of personal and public stories of that year. I just wanted to add to your very, very good presentation. Thank you, Vishma.
Thank you, sir. I think another film also got into the Cannes Festival. I'm not sure if it is Coffee or Cigarette.
Yeah,
Coffee
he won. He won
yeah.
Palme d'Or. He won
Right.
Camera d'Or. Yeah, Dead Man for Dead Man. He won Palme d'Or.
Right.
Camera d'Or. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Yes, Layali has unmuted herself. Layali, go ahead.
Okay, good evening.
Hi.
In terms of script or scenes, I haven't seen any kind of excitement and suspense or any surprising elements which are crucial in drama. Those elements of drama are almost absent, but in my opinion, they have been regained through poetry. You know that artists are usually taking, or most of the time are taking inspiration from the surroundings. Those trivial things which usually we don't care about, they are for poets invaluable. These things which could seem eccentric for us are meaningful and have full of sense for poets or artists. So in my opinion, such kind of movies or the idea which has been treated may not be coherent to most of us. If, for example, we evaluate the movie based on the known frame we have been usually used to judge films, would be a movie with zero suspense. But recontextualizing the things through artistic context, they become alive and bright. We see that the poems of Patterson, or the poems which have been written by Patterson, are constituting the interesting part in the whole movie. And I want also to conclude by this is my impression. I don't know if I was right or not. It is a philosophical attitude which has been presented to us through movie or through a piece of art. That's all.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Layali, for your observations. Yes, they are indeed very interesting. And since Layali has spoken about this poetic aspect, it was also one of the things that I noticed in the film. Even as he's constructing his poems, through the day, to me, it seemed like his life itself, had poetic qualities. The emphasis on structure, rhythm, pattern, the containment of emotion. I mean, poetry is not just about emotion, but also its containment within a particular kind of structure. So it was almost like the poems that he's composing and the life that he's leading and the serendipitous elements coming in the form of Laura into those poems, you know, kind of lighting up his otherwise staid and sedate life. I thought it was very, very. I was just making this point that the life itself seems constructed like a poem. So the poems seem like externalization of the rhythm and the pattern and the everydayness. For instance, the matchstick. I was reading somewhere that William Carlos Williams was a poet of things, not of ideas. So it seems like the film is kind of following closely on some of these ideas that you know, that Grishma also saw the parallel between the Patterson volumes and this film. Yeah. So would anyone else, before you formulate your thoughts, I thought I'll just come in briefly. Anyone who is ready to come in? Yeah, Geeta, go ahead.
Much like Carlos's poetry, I think what marks the film is also minimalism, you know, in the sense that whether it is the acting style or even the use of space, since Grishma brought up Michel de Certeau, I think the everydayness, the object, you know, like daily, it is that same thing that he carries, you know, that little box that he carries in his hand. There is a focus on that in several of the scenes. And also repetition, you know, the 6 days, there's hardly any difference from one day to the other. So it is something like, you know, maybe the chorus lines of a poem that, you know, repeat, that come back again and again. So these scenes, you know, although he says Monday, Tuesday, you know, that comes up on the screen, there's hardly anything that distinguishes one day to the other, including the sleeping posture of, you know, Laura and Patterson. And I thought the relationship between Laura and Patterson also was very interestingly depicted. You know, like Patterson is very, you can say, very restrained in his emotions, and whereas Laura is more, you know, like demonstrative and more effusive, whether it comes to, you know, showing affection for the dog or for the husband, for the partner. And at the same time, Laura is shown as, you know, frivolous and capricious, a little bit eccentric. She has these sudden urges, like that urge to buy a guitar, even though she knows that there is a problem with money and they cannot, you know, like spend that much on something fancy. So these little moments in the film I thought were very interesting, and also the last scene. I was wondering why. I mean, what was the idea behind making that tourist a Japanese tourist, you know, and who comes up with this gift to Patterson, which comes to him, of course, at an opportune moment. He has lost his diary in which he used to write his poems, and that's the exact same. That's the gift that the Japanese tourist thinks of giving it to him. So, I mean, I was just wondering what was the idea behind having a non-Western tourist give him that gift, you know, almost as if he had some kind of vision of Patterson requiring something like this, and or some connection. You know, he's also sitting there talking about William Carlos Williams, and he knows little things about the poet. He says, yes, I heard he was a doctor in this town and things like that. So that's something that I was also a little puzzled about. Why this Japanese story?
Yeah, and also that exclamation, the aha or some exclamation that they exchanged.
Right,
Yeah,
the aha kind of
yeah.
a thing.
Grishma, any thoughts on that? Aniruddha, I'll come to you. Grishma, any thoughts on the Japanese in the end?
Ma'am, I think I think, Jarmusch in some sense, in almost all of his films, he tries to bring in a lot of elements. I don't know if there is a specific, purpose or narrative purpose for the person, except that I remember seeing his book, which was on Patterson, William Carlos's book in Japanese. So that could be one reason. And also in other films, in Mystery Train and other films, he sort of tries to bring in all these, a lot of, references from other cultures, be it music or characters. Even in this film, Laura is essentially a middle. I don't know. I think she is from the Middle East, and there are, people from different, almost trying to show that this is this is a melting bowl of, and a lot of people are coming in and all that. I don't know if there is a specific reference, but then he keeps doing it, because in Mystery Train, I remember two characters going to Tokyo. So I think he has a personal favoritism to Japan and Tokyo and all that.
Grishma, it is in that train, two Japanese couple are in America, is it?
Oh yeah. Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
But then there are references of Japanese people.
I mean, there's a lot of global. What if we can? I can call a lot of universalism. 3 of his films travels through the world. I mean, linking what Kieslowski says. He wants to say the same thing happening at different points in the world, but with different meaning. Kieslowski says that. Different things, same thing happening at different time with different meanings. That's one reference always goes in Jarmusch's films. Yeah.
Right. Also, so why these Japanese couple are visiting America is because of their love for Elvis Presley. So so he's coming to Patterson for his love for William Carlos Williams. So I think he plays with these things in his film.
Okay. There is, Aniruddha, please come in. Sridhar, our historian, has given us all something to read, and probably he'll also come in. Before that, Aniruddha, go ahead. Are you there? Okay.
I'd like to respond to one thing that has been initiated by Grishma. She was telling something about the actress that she is from Middle East. Actually, this actress who is modeling the role of wife, she is Iranian actress living in France, living in exile. And she has been graduated from Azad University in Tehran.
Right. She Golshifteh Farahani is an Iranian actor. She had to leave Iran because she acted in a film. She acted nude in a film, and so hence she can't go back to Iran. So, but I was talking about the character of Golshifteh in the film. There is also Persian references. She says she dreamt of a Persian city and a white elephant.
In a white elephant.
Right.
Silver elephant. Yeah.
Silver elephant. Yeah.
Yeah.
Layali, thank you for that reference. I didn't know that. Yeah.
Welcome.
Sanjay Kumar, yes. Aniruddha seems to have.
I just wanted to comment on that Japanese connection. That poets like Ezra Pound and T.S. Eliot, all these people who were associated with Imagism, they were also inspired by haikus. Japanese haiku had an influence on Imagism, and this Imagism had a connection with the, William Carlos Williams' poetry, who was initially associated with these people, and later on New York School. All these people are, they are influenced by Japanese haikus. So probably to bring that element, the Japanese character has been introduced. And one thing, and another thing is very obvious that, he says that you keep this diary, probably, he says that some empty pages, they give you a lot of promises, something like that, he says. That means obviously we have seen that Patterson has lost his diary, and now he has got a new diary, so he can write his poems. And of course we see that he writes immediately after that one poem. So that announces another beginning. I mean, after this loss of the diary, so it is like regeneration. Again he is writing, so it gives hope. So probably, I mean, I just thought of that.
Yeah. Yeah, that also seems quite plausible and quite likely why the Japanese character in the end. Aniruddha, yes, yes.
Hello, am I audible now?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, sorry, ma'am. Actually, I was trying to talk. There was some audio issues I had.
Okay.
So about the end of the film, I was watching a YouTube video, and some person commented this very interesting theory, stating that the man in the end, the Japanese man in the end of the film, might be a time traveler. He might be this. It sounds weird, but yeah, the thing is that the Japanese man in the end, he is a time traveler, and in the future Patterson's poems and everything have already been published. And because Patterson's one book where he had all of his poems, that's destroyed now, he has no will to again write or anything. That is why when the Japanese man asks him, are you also a poet from Patterson, New Jersey, he says that no, I'm not. So in a way, this time traveler has come back to motivate Patterson again to pick up the book and start writing again. Because if you see, their interaction is very specific. The Japanese man doesn't ask his name or anything. He just starts talking about William Carlos Williams, and then he asks him very specifically, "Do you also write?" And then when Patterson says that no, I'm a bus driver myself, then to just show that how that is also poetic, he brings in references of the French artist. He brings in references of the French artist who was also a meteorologist on the Eiffel Tower, and another person who was William Carlos Williams himself, who I think was a doctor before he became an artist. So I think that in a way he was trying to motivate him. He was trying to motivate him to get back to his love for the art of poetry by giving him very specific examples. Everything which Patterson said, the Japanese man had an answer to it, and an answer as such that Patterson would, again be motivated or uplifted enough to, okay, let me try my hand at it once again. I personally would not think of it that the person was a time traveler. The Japanese man was a time traveler. But another thing which the comment said is that the thing which he says is that it might just be one of the famous poems which Patterson writes in the future. That is why even while going without any context, no nothing, the Japanese man just turns towards Patterson and just says even before in the conversation when he says Patterson is like, what does mean? He never justifies it, he never answers that question and just moves on, and never once asks his name. To me, I would not personally go as far as to say that the person was a time traveler, but I do feel like this happened purposely. There was a purpose to it, like some sort of a guardian angel or something, where this interaction was that I think that is why the interaction was so very specific to what Patterson likes, and that is why he again and again brought the fact that from Patterson, New Jersey, because the Japanese man knew English. He knew English well enough to have a proper conversation with. But again and again, if you would have noticed, he was saying the same line. Are you also from Patterson, New Jersey? Is this XYZ from Patterson, New Jersey? To again and again reinstate the fact that there have been great artists from here and you might just be one of them. So there is no point in stopping. That's why he was again and again, telling the fact that Patterson, New Jersey, and and they had a very specific conversation about William Carlos Williams and how just people who doing everyday jobs, everyday things turned out to be artists. So I think that I kind of, this is my interpretation of the last scene. Again, nothing, no substantial evidence to it, but I just feel that this might explain it. So yeah, thank you, ma'am.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Aniruddha. Yeah, yes, sir.
Aha, Anirudh. I mean, Aha is the connect. Yeah, really, there's a poetic connect. Sanjay also brought in that. I also wanted to say that, but Sanjay is a literary historian. He said it as better because I didn't know that. I mean, I wanted to say that there's some link, but Sanjay said it. I'm very happy. And what Anirudh said is, I say, aha, yeah, that's the connect, poetic connect. That's what I said, universalism. Jarmusch is always looking towards some kind of universalism about human behavior and human living and some connect. And that particular film, vampire film, what is that Grishma name? That I don't understand.
Only Lovers Left Alive, sir. Only Lovers Left Alive.
Yeah. That's where a kind of universalism which he wants to bring in. I mean, he looks at, I mean, he's independent in terms of Hollywood, because Hollywood films has a frame of American life, American power, American economy, and everything going with that. He want to go beyond this. His idiosyncratic films are always about that. To good or bad, to explore outside in the universe and say that these are human existentialist realities. And that becomes so much refined in Patterson. That's why I said he came so near to comedy war. Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else? Yes, Sanjay Kumar, go ahead.
Yeah, actually, there are so many parallels with the life of Patterson, as we have already discussed. But let us see, for example, Patterson is a driver and he writes poetry in his free time. Then we have obviously William Carlos Williams, who is basically a doctor, and he writes poems in his free time. Again, Franco Hara, who has been mentioned in the conversation between the Japanese guy and Patterson. So there, he asks whether Jean Dubuffet, and Jean Dubuffet was an artist. Basically he was doing his military service in the Eiffel Tower, and this event has been mentioned by Franco Hara. In fact, Franco Hara again was a curator in a museum, and he wrote poetry. So all these people, they were doing something in their life as a profession and for earning bread, and then they were also writing poetry. So Franco Hara, since particularly he has been mentioned by the Japanese character, he wrote. In fact, he organized an exhibition in his museum about the works of Jean Dubuffet, and Jean Dubuffet was he went to Switzerland and he founded a museum called Collection de l'Art Brut. That museum is in Lausanne. Okay. And there is some personal association with that museum because I worked as interpreter for that museum. So I know this Jean Dubuffet, he was a founder of l'Art Brut, what we call in French, and in English it is, some people calls outsider art. So this outsider art is about the paintings particularly and the other artistic works of those people who have never been associated with any school They have never studied painting in any school. And most of them are, you know, the marginalized people. Either they have been living in the mental asylums, even children or anybody who has not learned properly, you know, painting or any art, but still they are doing something. So in this museum of Collection de l'Art Brut in Lausanne, you will find all these paintings, all these you know, artistic works. So this Japanese character mentions Franco Hara. So there is a relation, you know. He first he talks about Jean Dubuffet, and he then he mentions Franco Hara, because Franco Hara, he wrote a poem in 1959 called Nafta, in which he paid a tribute, he paid a homage to Jean Dubuffet. So we find that Jean Dubuffet, again, who was doing his military service at Eiffel Tower as meteorologist, and he was involved with the artistic activities. William Carlos Williams, again, doctor and writing poetry. Franco Hara, again, curator of a museum, writing poetry. Patterson, driver, writing poetry. So it is not impossible to combine your profession with, you know, artistic, with your artistic ambitions. So that is what even Laura is doing. You know, she is also trying to come out with the, you know, humdrum daily life to learn. She says that, you know, we should learn something new in our life. You know, we are aging. We should. So she wants to learn guitar. She is doing all kinds of painting in her home. Even her cupcakes are very artistic. The patterns which are made and which are also appreciated by Patterson, and the whole city, whoever goes to that market. That, you know. So that shows that all these people, they are trying to come out of their daily humdrum life to create something interesting. So these are the, you know, running threads between all these characters and those references outside the film also.
Inside the film.
Thank you.
Jai, aha, aha. Yeah.
Hi.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Kavya. Go ahead. And yeah, go ahead.
I didn't hear the first part of the presentation, but personally, what I liked about the movie is that usually the movies which show this repeated everydayness of life will be, you know, we feel it is very boring after a point of time. So in this movie, even though it was a very long movie, that I personally felt that everydayness and repeatedness are something very beautiful and poetic. So that's what I personally felt. Another thing I observed is that I don't know what to comment about that, but the moment that everydayness or repeated action is disrupted, like that evening when they went for a movie and for dinner, the book of poetry is lost. It was torn apart by the dog. So I was just thinking, what's the relationship between that, maintaining that everyday routine and then breaking it, and then the poetry is lost, the connection which the movie is making. But that was an interesting connection. So many other kinds of repeatedness, the black and white, all other things, I personally found it like, I liked it. It added to the poetry of the movie, I think. I don't know, it's just a personal opinion.
Yeah, repeatedness also in terms of the twins. The
Yeah,
theme of the
twins, yeah.
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 Yeah, Grishma, do you want to come in?
Right. Thanks a lot, Sanjay sir and Kavya ma'am. Adding on, just a point adding on to Sanjay sir's, very illustrative comment. William Carlos Williams was wrote at the same period of time when T.S. Eliot was also writing. You know, both of them are modernist poets. So I remember reading this somewhere, don't know where exactly, but he scorned T.S. Eliot's poetry, and he said T.S. Eliot is taking poetry back into the classrooms. He says so. I think a lot of them from the New York school, including Frank O'Hara, etc. They wrote about very simple, ordinary things and people, or it didn't involve a lot of grand allusions, or which is very typical to say T.S. Eliot and a few other like Yeats and other modernist writers. So they sort of saw poetry as something that we should take with us on an everyday basis. I mean, that is what I make of it. And to Kavya ma'am's comment, um, um, uh, I think even when there is repetition, it's not typical repetition as such, right? See, he's waking up at 6 o'clock, around 6 o'clock, right? But every day he's not waking up at the same exact time, and every day when he goes to his work, it's not the same exact things that is happening. It's not even the same exact person. He's meeting someone, he's meeting a girl, and then he's giving money to someone who's sitting on the street, right? And then even when he's drinking just one beer, going to the same place, the people he meets and the experiences he has are entirely different. So uh, I think that is also an interesting thing, I think. And what was the other point you made? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was just saying about the night when they went for movie and dinner. That's the same
Right,
night when the book was eaten by the dog.
right. Yeah,
So I was saying that even I'm not saying that it is like a dull repetition or anything, but I'm saying that that routine is actually very beautiful. Usually routines are very boring, but here it is
right,
very beautiful, poetic. Like when we see it, we feel that I personally felt that I want some that routine to be maintained in the movie somehow. And
right,
in the structure of the film, it's when it is broken, that routine is broken, poetry also is lost.
right,
So I was
right.
thinking about the connection between that routine life of his and his poetry, not in the within the plot, but largely.
Right. So I remember reading this. I don't know. I'm not sure which theorist though. But then he says, see, every day constitutes of certain things, which is interrupted in some sense by an external force. Right. It can be mechanisms of the state, etc., etc. But then that is how everydayness is. Even theoretically, that's how we see it. It cannot in some sense flow, but in Patterson's case, I think he was just too excited to see Laura so happy, right? He actually keeps his book in the basement. And this was one other thing that I found interesting, because the whole house is Laura's, and Patterson's library is actually in the basement. It consists of a
Yeah,
couple
yeah.
of books, and that's it, right? And I think it's probably because of the excitement that he left it there in well, I don't know. I mean, that's my
Yeah, it's not a question, Eric. I was just saying what I felt, and I also felt that this repeated coming in of twins, no twins in the movie, girls, and the girl who read poetry to him, and the poetry sounded very similar, like Patterson's own poems, like the way it is structured. So we can even think that that's not a real girl. Maybe because his wife talks about the twins they may have later on, so it may be a thought about his own children and they writing poetry, something like that. We can even think of it as an imaginary scene if we want. It's like just reading into the scene.
right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Divya, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Divya.
Thank you, ma'am. I just have a few scattered observations. The first is that the fact that the hero of the movie is not like Grishma ma'am mentioned. He's not your typical hero. So I thought that was very expressionist in that sense, almost like a Tennessee Williams or Arthur Miller's play, where they make the common man, they sort of democratized the idea of the lead character of a movie. So I thought that was great. Second, the one observation was that the jester Harlequin analogy. At one point, the Joker Harlequin analogy, at one point he asks her, "What is the guitar called? Is it the Jester?" And she says, "No, it's the Harlequin." So I thought he made that very obvious there.
Right.
I thought it would be interesting to read about Patterson the place and Patterson the book, in order to understand a little bit more about the movie. And I found it extremely insightful because one of the ways that the book, as in the series, the epic poem by William Carlos Williams, has been described is Patterson is a city and a city in a person, and a person in a city, which I think truly just sums up the movie. There's actually this quote from the poem, which of course I'm reading out, I haven't read it. But it says Patterson lies in the valley under the Passaic Falls, its spent waters forming the outline of his back. He lies on his right side, head near the thunder of the waters filling his dreams. Eternally asleep, his dreams walk about the city where he persists incognito. I thought this was very relevant because he is hardly a presence in the city itself, but his dreams are everywhere. His dreams, his poetry, it's everywhere because he's deriving his inspiration from every little thing. And also at one point when he's writing the poem in his head, because thunder of the waters filling his dreams, there's actually a part where he's actually writing a poem and you can see into his head where there is these crashing waves. So I thought that was a direct reference to the poem itself. I read that Patterson, the city, was one of the first places where industrialization and uh, uh, immigration began, um, in the beginning in America. So it's because of these small beginnings, these small everyday people, that capitalism and industrialization was able to fully catch on in the US. So I think it also celebrates the place and the everydayness, basically, of things. The fact that without someone as essential as like a bus driver whom you wouldn't otherwise notice, things wouldn't function, where even when that bus breaks down, there's a bit of a chaos for quite a while. Little things that we take for granted, even the something as simple as that megaphone shape on that matchbox, even Laura notices it, but Patterson is the one who makes poetry out of it. So anyone can notice it, but to actually turn it into art is an active effort, something you have to go out of your way to do. You have to find the beauty in the little things. Also, something I noticed about Laura's character is that as soon as she earns some money from the cupcake sales, she immediately spends it. Where her first thought is, "Oh, let's celebrate," and he's very taken aback. He's like, "Oh, okay. I mean, sure." Thought that speaks to her character a little bit because she's very impulsive, very whimsical. But I found her character very strange, to be honest. The way that he's the one who walks the dog, even though he's the one working all day, she seems to be home. I agree that she was very eccentric and lively, but I didn't understand why her character was portrayed in such a way where she seemed pretty self-involved in some places, although she did take a lot of pride in his art and everything. Also, now at this point, I might just be reading too much into it, but I think Sir mentioned something about uh, the movie being inspired by haikus, or William Carlos Williams being inspired by haikus. In the last interaction with the Japanese tourist, he says the line specifically this way without any articles. He says, "Poetry in translation is like taking shower with raincoat on." That is 17 syllables. So I don't know if that was intentionally done. I think it was, because very little in this movie seems unintentional. But the fact that the guy is Japanese and he's saying this sentence, and his English doesn't seem very broken. He seems perfectly capable of using articles and correct grammar. But the fact that he said it that way, I think was intentionally kept at 7 syllables, just for a further reference to like a haiku. Uh, that was all. I actually had a question as to why black and white was made so prominent throughout the movie. I understand the Harlequin thing, but why was she so obsessed with the whole thing? That's just my question. Thank you so much.
Divya, thanks a lot for your close reading of so many elements in the film and for bringing all those up. About the black and white, Grishma, do you have anything to say?
Well, I think I think it just is his way of, dealing with repetition and all that. I mean, just look at how she uses black and white. It's always black and white, but then it's never the same thing. So probably some indication into that. That's it. I don't know. Maybe this is his way of, I don't know.
Because
Yeah.
things are so contrasting there.
Yeah.
Everything, yeah, because everything what she prints circles and white.
Right.
She puts that cream and deep brown. I mean, that's the character between the two, the man and the lady. I mean, right? I mean, there are two contrasting everyday. One who celebrates, let's say, kind of excitement, and one who goes through the grinding of the lace every day. And is there a dialectic in that? Is there a junction in that? I mean, one relies on the other or not? But when the poem is toned down and last, the kind of a silent pain what he feels and kind of a outward what you call pain she expresses. I mean, there are two contrasting things it is brought in. Is the way outside word is like that, something exhibitionist and something internal, where they coincide, where the word lives. I mean, that kind of interpretation is possible because of the poeticness of the, yeah.
Also, to sort of add on to the duality that runs through the film, there are twins, and then there's black and white, there's repetition. So probably, a filmic technique or something to just, I don't know, maybe something like that. Also,
Okay.
I mean, he is bringing something together which is opposite, and that conjoins life and liveliness in a routine. I mean, that's what Sanjay wanted to say.
Yeah, we have about a minute. Would anyone want to come in now, or when we rejoin? You're most welcome. We have about a minute. Yes, Tarakeshwar. Yes.
Just a quick response about this word repetitiveness or repeatedness. I think the better concept would be to use a pattern or the rhythm of life. So the pattern, it follows certain things, it also differs. So it is not completely repetitive. It's more creative in that sense. Lara is also drawing patterns. So there is a pattern of the reference to a dream of the twins, and then it recurs again and again, but in different shapes. So I think the better word could be, is a pattern or a rhythm, which is repetitive, but again it's different. So I think we need to avoid this word repetitive. Yes, mundane, quotidian.
Tarakeshwar, would you like to continue, or you made your point?
Maybe I will come back later.
Okay, okay. Anyone else? Yeah.
Yeah, this is Sanjay.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, I want to talk about stream of consciousness in this film. If you see from one point to another how we travel, and this film seems to be so well crafted that I don't see even a single scene, a single statement is superfluous. It is so well crafted. You see, when Patterson is in the bus, he is driving, and it is probably Monday when he's driving, and then there are two men, two passengers who are talking about their encounter with girls. And then finally that conversation ends with that they have no time because they could not interact with the girls, they could not call the girls on mobile because they don't have time. They are doing overtime, and they are working at night, and they are doing overtime. So then from that probably the word time, this becomes an inspiration for Patterson to write a poem, because immediately after that we would see that he is writing a poem on time, where he says that when I was a child, I learned that there were 3 dimensions, and then he says the 4th dimension is time. Again when you see the scene when husband and wife they are eating pie, and then Laura says that it is Patterson says that it's a secret pie because what is inside he doesn't know. He guesses probably it's a fish with, and then that is not correct. Then he calls it secret pie. Then immediately after secret pie, secret book is mentioned. So there is an association with the secret pie. Secret book is what? That is the book which was written by Petrarch, the Italian poet, who wrote poems about Laura. And again, here also we have the character of Laura. Then he immediately looks at the painting, which is waterfall, hanging on the wall, and that reminds Patterson of the poem written by this girl, the young girl, who wrote a poem called Waterfalls. Waterfalls, two separate words, not waterfall, but of course there is an association. And she mentions the name of Emily Dickinson again, which is very interesting because Emily Dickinson could hardly publish her. I mean, she was not interested in publishing her poems. There were hardly 10 poems which were published in her life, and most of the work, we know Emily Dickinson as a great poet, but most of the poems were published after her death only. Hundreds of poems they were published after her death, and she was never interested. Those poems were kept secretly in her drawer, and they were discovered by her younger sister. So later on, those poems were discovered. Again, these people, they are writing like this girl. She is writing poems, and Patterson is calling it secret book. Again, Patterson's diary is also called as secret book. And you will see that all these people, even the secret book of Petrarca, that was published posthumously. So you will see that there is a connection. There is some association with the other, and one scene after another, we are traveling by making some association, which sometimes may not be very obvious, but there is a connection. And another thing which already Grishma mentioned, and I'm very happy actually, that presentation was really very scientific, very pointed, and she mentioned so many things which we could develop, ultimately. See, particularly, for example, leisure time, how they are using leisure time. You see, Patterson doesn't have a mobile. Okay, he is using his leisure time for something which is more creative, which he can go for observation. He can put his thoughts to poetry. And Laura again has, in one of the conversations, you will see that in the in the bar, the bar owner the bartender is holding his mobile. He gets probably the message from his wife. So he holds the mobile and then he asks, "Do you have a mobile?" So he doesn't have mobile. Patterson doesn't have a mobile, but Laura has a mobile, and he says that Laura has a mobile, a laptop, and iPad. But in the film, we hardly see, Laura using all these gadgets. She is more interested in something which is more creative. She knows how to use her leisure time. Though she goes online, in one of the scenes we will see that she talks about Petrarca, how she came to know about the poetry of Petrarca. That is because she read something online. So that means she is using internet. But then how all these people, they are using their leisure time, and trying to avoid just being a consumer. That reminds us of this book. What is that? I forgot that. 1968, related to 1968 movement, that book was written. where we talk about that how when we come after our works, after our office, and our time goes in watching TV, and our time is completely taken away by the market. We do not have time, some good moments for ourselves, for to develop some healthy relationship. So that is what is beautifully depicted in this film, and Grishma already talked about them, though not in much in detail, but all those points are worth developing in this discussion, I think. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for that elaborate reading. I think some of the larger theoretical, the implications, larger theoretical and implications of what you were saying, Sridhar was trying to point out some of them in the chat box right at the beginning. Sridhar, would you like to come in? Would you like to make your point regarding some of these aspects? Please go ahead. Yeah, Sridhar, go ahead.
Sorry. Just a second. See, why I was making those comments are, see, the kind of movies we are discussing in Talking Movies has a pattern. It is also in line with so-called alternative politics or environmental movements or ecological, every romanticism. Every pain is romanticized. So this is all actually came against masses. Entire social sciences born against masses. See, when we only consume certain thing, say a flute or something, that will be artistic, and you wrote for centuries. When all others also started using it, consuming it, like you call mainstream movie, then you reject it or dismiss it. It is mainstream, and talk in a demeaning way, though you don't say, but we are doing so-called alternative in such a way, dismissing the masses agency. So that is a problematic, and I can't see any answer except self-satisfaction. So that's why I put that. So many people are doing. People talk about Gandhi more, but they never quote Gandhi. Ramchandra Guha said once, these all alternative activists and movements claim Gandhi as a model, but they never quote from his life or from his writing anything. So this is all also has links to this birth of very social sciences itself, to dismiss the agency for the masses. When everyone uses flute, you have a problem, so you dismiss it and you deny it. So that pattern I could see in all these kind of so-called alternative. So that's what troubling me. Why should we see mainstream has come into picture? Because taking all this into experience and thought into their thought. So that's why I thought, and I was searching for some support for readings, and I found this signed DCC. So I actually then I wanted to pose it. So it's not for a particular screening, but all discussions overall. That's it.
Okay.
Sridhar, I very much dissent with Sridhar's views. Being an activist for 30 years, I dissent with his views. The things mainstream doesn't remain mainstream. They transit over a time, and there's a dialectics, and alternatives comes out of dialectics. So what is a flute pre-40 is not a flute post-2000, Sridhar. If you go on saying that things seem static, doesn't seem static. Alternative poses the things in a different way. Yeah, you got to use same things in the word, Wittgenstein. You got to use the same things in the word. The thing in itself changes its meaning. If I go on saying that what is mainstream stated, you stated no. There's a time and there's a lapse of the time and the politics of the time and society of the time. So alternative cannot be dismissed so much easily like that. That's what, Sridhar, I have a conflict with you and we'll discuss it over. Yeah.
Yeah. Two people had unmuted themselves, Tarakeshwar and Geeta. Geeta and then Tarakeshwar. I think they are responding to Sridhar. Yeah.
No, not exactly.
Okay.
I was just thinking about, since there is a remark about the bar in the chat room. I was just thinking a very interesting space. One of the very interesting spaces in the film is also the bar. You know, largely a homosocial space, except for the presence of one woman there. And what is, like, I think somebody was talking about how Patterson is not depicted as, you know, a typical hero, but there is one scene in the bar, the only time when he becomes, you know, a typical hero, where he snatches the gun from that African American person, and then the whole thing is, you know, turns into a joke because it's just a toy gun. So I thought the bar was also, and there are several scenes which are set in the bar in the film, and so that's also an interesting space that Patterson occupies.
Yeah. Tarakeshwar, yes.
I think I should thank everyone for watching the film, and the way they have given the details in the discussion is really interesting. I think we don't know how to move further. Yeah, in one way, Sridhar quotation that he put up in the chat box in the beginning gives us an hint to us. And joining the debate, this the class and the mass, or the mainstream and the alternative, are the working class mass culture versus this class culture, poetry, art, things like that, which is not the mass culture. So there is a conflict between the two, but it is interesting that we look at them as either or. They are not either or. There is a dialect between the two. I do agree with that. The mass defines the class and the class defines the mass. Each requires the other for its self-definition. So in order to achieve self-definition, it has to define the other two. That is where we need to focus on. In the film, though we talk about the pattern of their life, which is quotidian, mundane, ordinary, there is a desire to overcome that, either through the actual dreams, or the dream, the aspiration in their life, what they want to be. Lara's statements really come through that. In fact, this fellow doesn't have much aspirations, but he's writing poetry. And the word that Grishma used to describe their life, bubble, that is an interesting word, I thought. So there is a bubble, you want to come out of the bubble too. But unless you break the bubble, you can't come out. And you're comfortable within the bubble too. So this dialectic, this aspiration, and why we look at them not as complementary to what, I'm not going to put my fingers on it right now, but these two are complementary. As the quotation that Sridhar put up in the beginning says, so there is a serious art and then the theorization of the mundane. So you're theorizing the mundane, but you're also there's uncomfortable with it. You want to have an handle over it. So that's why you're theorizing it. But somewhere Sridhar was also getting into the trap of romanticizing the mass culture too. That is also problematic. Unless we see the connection between the two, how they work in tandem in sustaining or changing the system, it would be difficult to. We will be still will be within the framework of that system. So if you want to get a better handle on the system, we need to understand the way these two work together, either to sustain it or to change the system.
Yeah.
But in any case, Tarakeshwar, we are into it. The problem with your theorization is we are not outside, we are in it. I'm in mass culture and I'm in alternative culture. And mass and alternative together. We should understand it. This is the 20th century where makers and viewers are together in one. So we are in it and we are gauging it. So there is no observer and observed. So dialectics runs here. That is what I wanted to tell Sridhar and I wanted to tell you, because we are not outside it. While theorizing, we cannot come out. That's what I found good with Grishma is she doesn't come out while theorizing. That's what I like with every young. They don't come out while theorizing, but we'll come out to find something opposite while we come out.
Yeah. Okay. So Tarakeshwar has muted himself back. So maybe he agrees with Paniraj sir. Yeah, Sridhar, yes.
See, I'm not asking you an explanation, taking ownership, because the so-called alternative or these binaries, whatever, whether you speak it out or not, but you have an intended meaning that it will address expanding democracy or giving voice to certain mechanisms, but take whole century into consideration, 19th, 20th, and even present century, but they don't answer it. Whatever path we took, they don't answer it. Rather, they essentialize masses.
Who will answer, Sridhar? Who will answer? People from 1920, who will capture the time and the whole time frame? Is there any master to capture the time frame? Why do we blame the alternative? Why do you blame the alternative? Why can't you blame the mainstream? Mainstream also captures the time, isn't it? No. Mainstream captures and owns the mainstream and represents the mainstream.
No. That construction itself is a problem.
That's where we get into dialectics of it. That's what we don't allow anybody to represent time. We don't allow anybody to represent something. We come to dialectics of it. And the point is the point with theoreticians for me and an activist is that at some time you celebrate mainstream and sometimes you differ from the mainstream. You castigate the mainstream and sometimes you celebrate the mainstream. What is it? No. Not you particularly, Sridhar, but whole kind of theoretical university discussion.
Actually, Tara has come to the point. Actually, Tara was making more meaning to the whatever I have made. So, but still, when you take the claims, unstated claims into stated or unstated claims into consideration, we can put straightforwardly without any mask, saying that real enemies of masses are these people only, so-called theoreticians of alternative.
Theoreticians of alternative, not alternative practitioners. No,
How
let's
can
make a
you
difference,
different?
Sridhar. Let's make a difference because I am pained because again and again who practice alternatives are targeted as theoreticians of alternatives. No, they are not. I'm pained because you come up
Sir,
all of a
sir,
sudden in 1970 you
sir,
come up with
sir.
postmodern. No, 1 second, listen to me. You come up with postmodernism and start celebrating mainstream, right? While
You can
mainstream practitioners
you can label anything.
no. I assume the thing I will come with the papers, right? The point is you cannot come out of a time and say celebrate. I mean, I see people that people are watching mainstream movies in 1970s and all of it, and no theoretician comes out. And 1980s postmodernism comes in universities. You start celebrating postmodernism and the schoolmaster, right? That film, this film. And 2000, when practitioners of alternative films are practicing, you come and talk about how they are something. I mean, that is where my problem with theory, sir. Because don't combine theory with theoretical practitioners, right? There are so many practitioners outside in the ground level who want to break through the mainstream and see something new. Let us understand it in dialectical way because we are putting metaphors into different ways. That's the whole problem we are having. Okay, I'm sorry to be excited because being an activist, I landed debate without any malice. Malice, Sridhar, no, I mean, Tarkeshwar knows it. Yeah, sorry, Sridhar.
I don't think Grishma ever anticipated the discussion taking all these dimensions.
Nikhila, it is not. Grishma is not target.
No, not at all. No, I'm just saying.
No, she has done beautiful presentation.
No.
She has given a beautiful presentation.
No, I'm also not. No, I'm just saying that. Yeah, she did not.
I'm giving some thought for further thinking.
Sure. Yeah, your point is well taken, Sridhar, certainly. Yes, sir.
Nikhila, old people are fighting among themselves. Don't worry about the young. Sridhar, I love you. I mean, I want to debate like this. Yeah.
Okay. Actually, Divya has been waiting a while to make this point. I didn't want to interrupt this very interesting discussion. So, Divya, go ahead now.
I just had another observation about the movie. Geeta ma'am was also mentioning the interactions in the bar. At one point, we noticed throughout that Laura is just sort of revamping things that are already in the house. Like she's painting everything black and white, whether it's her clothes or it's bowls or it's the door frame or something. But she's not actually making something new, even the curtains and everything. And Patterson doesn't seem particularly enthusiastic about all those things. Like he just says very formally that, oh yeah, nice. But at one point in the bar, after the bartender Doc, he's fought with his wife, he says to him, don't try to change things or you'll make them worse than they were. So I think somewhere that resonates with the fact that Laura is, in her attempt to make things better, maybe sort of in her attempt to make change everywhere, she might just be making it worse, unnecessarily adding more and more and more to things. Also, I had a theory maybe about the recurrence of twins. I read somewhere that it's about the duality of existence, the fact that the artist cannot exist without the banalities of life and all of that. But is it somewhere possible that we only noticed the twins so much because it was mentioned at the beginning of the movie? Because she had a dream about the twins and she said, oh, what if we were to have twins? Does that somewhere speak to the fact that we don't notice things until they are spoken about? Even something like a match, we wouldn't pay attention to it until Patterson goes and writes a poem about it. So agreed, there was a lot of focus on the twins in the movie, but would we have noticed it as much if it hadn't been brought up in the beginning of the movie? That was just my addition. Thank you.
Yeah. Grishma, anything to say? Anything to add at this point?
Thank you both Sridhar sir and Paniraj sir. I mean, I really would like to look more into it, your discussion, and it really is some indication to read upon and all that. Responding to Divya's comment, I watched one interview of Jim Jarmusch wherein he said the twins were not intended at all in the film. It was not ideally in the script at all, right? So what happened is one of the cast in the film happened to be a twin girl, and so this mother came and she was like, see, can you just tell me, specify the days of the shoot, so then I can alternate between my kids, you know, and I mean, one can go to school and the other can come. So some sort of arrangement she can make. She says this to Jim Jarmusch, and he was really fascinated by this idea. He's like, I mean, that's really interesting, because if you have identical twins, you can, you know, place them anywhere. So that is when he is actually bringing in the idea of twins. He says it doesn't really have a proper narrative, you know, function as such, but then it could also, he also wanted it to repeat, because Laura is mentioning this in the initial part of the film, in her dream, right? So like how in our day-to-day life, if we are, you know, asked to focus on one thing, you probably end up seeing the same things everywhere, you know, everywhere you go, or in conversations, you probably, you know, end up noticing this more. So that was, I think, the narrative function of the twins.
Yeah. Yeah. Would anyone else have anything to add to this discussion? It's been a really wonderful discussion. The film has provoked so many, you know, observations and so many issues immediately within the context of the film, and also the larger issues, which also, I think, provoke us to think about, you know, our own choices, the implications of our own choices, the choices of the films that we are making, the discussions we are having, and some of these issues. Would anyone want to say anything at this point before we wind up?
But that's what I want to say. This is a very interesting from Jarmusch's filmography. It's a very taken out film. I mean, Jarmusch could not have crafted such an intimate movie out of his filmography. You take any of his filmography, they're bizarre, they're gaudy at some times. And one film which very come close, but still different is Limit of Control. So Jarmusch, all of a sudden it comes out to Jarmusch. That's where I think that's where I was debating with Sridhar, that people who are in practice can come up with, I mean, with a series of his films, he was working out on this kind of reaction to outside world. What is called as, what you call mainstream or something. Replicate mainstream, mock mainstream, satire mainstream, or do something to change the idea of mainstream. He was working through all that. He did make two documentaries in between on mainstream musicians. I mean, the point is, all of a sudden you come out 2016 with this, and then change to zombie generation. I mean, that's where I want to study I am the one who want to look at a director and his work in an anthology, as a part of an anthology. I don't want to take Patterson out of his anthology. It's a part of his anthology, and that makes very interesting for me. And that's where Grishma's reading also makes me very interesting, because all of his films talking about everydayness and people trying to get out of everydayness with something extraordinary. Here, something extraordinary is poetry. That is coming with Carlos Williams, which he corrects this, William Carlos Williams. I mean, that's where the fineness of the film is. It's something which is interesting if you look at the Jarmusch's filmography. That's where I want everybody. I mean, sorry if I am sounding too much condescending. I want to locate this film in Jarmusch's filmography, where the whole of his idea of the world and existence to capitalism as it exists and how to resist it comes out in varied colors. It may not be the radical one, but it is an existentialist resistance against capitalist existence or routine existence. That's what I want to say.
If I want to look at a film, I want to look at it as a part of a filmography.
Yeah. Yes. Sanjay Kumar has
Yeah,
unmuted himself. Yes, yes.
yeah. Actually, again, coming back to the point of Grishma, she mentioned this, about William Carlos Williams, that he was not happy with the uh, initial poems written by T.S. Eliot. So, for example, in The Wasteland, he used the myths, Greek myths, and he used several languages. Sanskrit is there, as he says, Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. That's how the Wasteland ends. And you have German, so that makes the poem probably complicated in the, as William Carlos Williams has mentioned. And T.S. Eliot was considered as, well, he was a prominent poet, of course, of his period, but he was considered sometimes as a poet of the poets. That he was not so much accessible to the common masses. And William Carlos Williams, he had a different method of writing. In one of his poems, a sort of a song. So, for example, he gives this method. He says, "No ideas, but in things." And this is the line which is repeated. That's why I said in the film, there is not a single shot which is superfluous. There is this scene of rapper. Why this scene of rapper is there? In this laundry, when the washing machines are there, he is practicing one song where he says, "No ideas but in things." This is a line which is taken from a sort of a song by William Carlos Williams. So his way of writing was like, you take common things in our daily life and bring out poetry out of that. So you have Patterson doing that in the film. So we find him, for example, when he's driving the bus and he writes a poem, about the molecules. Something is there. Yeah, I go through trillions of molecules that move aside to make way for me, while on both sides trillions more stay where they are. This poem is written, and all of his poems, for example, the first one about the matchbox, also it arises from his daily experience. He is just watching a matchbox and then he writes this poem. So not in ideas but in things. That's exactly the formula given by William Carlos Williams, which Patterson in the film is following. So even every detail of this film contributes to a narrative which finally William Carlos, finally the director wanted to convey. So in that way, that's why I said it's a very beautifully crafted film.
Yeah. Thank you for your observations, minute observations, and the connections that you're making. I think if there's no other comment, we'll wind up what has been a really productive and wonderful discussion. Very, Grishma set the tone for this discussion very aptly right at the outset. I think it's been something that I think one of our best sessions so far, where we have all had something to say and contribute, and really this film has taken so many different dimensions in the course of our discussion. Grishma, is there some last point that you want to make before I formally thank everyone?
No, ma'am. I would just like to thank everyone for this wonderful opportunity. Thank you.
Okay. So thank you, Grishma, for suggesting the film Tarakeshwar, yes.
Oh, I just wanted to thank you.
Okay. So thank you, Grishma, for suggesting this film for us and for really giving us a very good opening in the form of your presentation. And thanks to everyone who has had so much to say about the film. it must have meant something to each one of us that, we have spoken so much about and around the film. So thank you all once again. In the next couple of weeks, we'll really have good films on hand. So don't forget to join us next Saturday, same time at 9 o'clock. Thanks all of you.
Nikhila,
good
Nikhila,
night.
thank you for remembering Gauri and respecting her. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank
sir.
you, everyone.
Yes, sir. Certainly. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you for
good night.
participating. Thank you. Good night.
Good night too.